Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today joined for the Axon Bulletin on a Sunday by Kevin Graham, the original, the one and only, the analogizer. How's it going, Kev?
Not too bad. Nice Sunday morning. Been out for a walk this morning. Listened to a bit of the Velvet Underground. Can you whack that on a Sunday morning?
Nice. What were you listening to?
The third album, I think it's just called The Velvet Underground. Very, very underrated, very more acoustic, more Lou Reed solo type stuff. Love it. Best Velvet Underground album for me.
Ideal. Kevin, you and I will be doing a music show as soon as you're able to come back in the studio. In the meantime, we've got a video editor looking through all the previous bulletins to pull out all your best analogies, and we'll be putting a compilation video out at some point this week, hopefully. Now, loads to talk about. Obviously, when Celtic are not playing, we will take one day of a weekend off, but obviously they're not playing at all this weekend. They're playing on Monday. But we thought, we can't go 2 days in a row without an Axon Bulletin, so we're in today. We'll be talking about a few things ranging from Damien Duff, his departure from Ireland, and all the kind of questions that raises. Philip Benkovic, will he, won't he? It was looking promising, now it's not. Jack Hendry, whose name has come into focus recently, Kevin. The John Kennedy interview, something that at Celtic State of Mind have been calling for all season. Moussa Dembele and how a transfer to Atletico Madrid might benefit Celtic. Shane Duffy and the comments obviously based on what John Kennedy was saying. Declan Gallagher. And also a look at Jonathan Afolabi, who was involved in a Scottish Cup game yesterday, which, it was one of these romantic Scottish Cup journeys that came to an end by, Bonnie Rose, who pushed them right into extra time, Kevin. Amy Canavan, who joins us on a Celtic State of Mind regularly on a Wednesday, is involved with Bonnie Rose, and I was kind of hoping to get a result. But it was after the match that we want to talk about and what happened with Afolabi and the racial abuse that he was subjected to. Absolutely shocking that we even have to discuss that, but we will discuss it. So straight away, what I'd like to talk about first of all, Kevin, yesterday, the press conference, in walks John Kennedy. We've been asking for that all season. Give Lenny a break. It just so happens it was probably a press conference where all the difficult questions were going to be asked in relation to the Dubai trip. So in walks John Kennedy. What was your view on Kennedy? I thought he came across extremely well.
It did come across extremely well. I did have a laugh when Radio Scotland actually says that we're going across to John Kennedy, and I went, Paul will be actually doing cartwheels there. This is what he's been shouting for weeks. First thing I think what we must say is, even though we had a day off yesterday, we never went to Dubai. We never went for a training day in Dubai, or to any hotels to have a training day. Mm-hmm. Kennedy spoke well. He always comes across as a knowledgeable guy, a very level-headed guy. Maybe that comes across with his lack of facial expressions at times. But again, it was admitting that we breached protocols when we were in Dubai was could be a bit dodgy for us. It actually could be when he admitted that we had broken some protocol rules, especially with Kilmarnock and St Mirren appealing their breaches as well. Everybody knew that we didn't breach protocol by going to Dubai. It was what happened in Dubai, the pictures that came out. With the social distancing, you look at all the football teams now, they have to have 2 buses. They can't interact in the changing room. There's got to be 2 metres between them at each time. Apart from on the pitch, even though some of your defenders give the 2 metre rule to centre forwards when they're on the pitch. But I think that's what a lot of clubs are going to be questioning. this was a business trip, so they should have been under those rules on this business trip. So them sitting playing bingo in the bar, no 2 metres apart, is something that they need to question with the SFA. But then we've all seen the Scotland team doing the conga. So that wasn't a big hoo-ha for the clubs at the time. So it's daft. They shouldn't have went to Dubai. I was quite clear on Monday that they shouldn't have been there. I don't care if the SFA says it was okay. They shouldn't have been there in a global pandemic. End of story.
Big thing, obviously, in preparation for the bulletins, Kevin. I always watch the conferences, and you do get used to the kind of, the approach of those who are able to get into these press conferences. And I know that the Cynic were in there, because the Cynic do tend to ask questions that certainly get a reaction. Really decent questions, leading questions. And to the point where just a few weeks back, I think Neil Lennon was speechless for a moment or two, until he composed himself and answered the question for the Cynic guys. But it was interesting that it was quite obvious that all the difficult Dubai stuff was going to come out yesterday. Now, we're not going to labour it. You've had your say, I've had my say. Everybody's been involved and had their say on it. But I just felt that John Kennedy did deal with it particularly well. I'm going to go back to Jim Orr's comment last week, Kevin, and he was talking about how words are important. So people are saying to me, Neil Lennon didn't mean that Celtic needed a culture change. He just meant they needed to change their mentality. Well, that's not what he said. Words are important. So I think John Kennedy's words were very important in terms of the COVID, because he didn't use the word protocol. So he just said there was a few slip-ups, So all these, all these different things will be highlighted, and everything's going to be poured over. But again, I thought he was very composed, and I've been his biggest critic this season. The reason I wanted him to start doing things like this is I just felt, if you're a team, if you're a coaching, if you and I were doing something, Kevin, and the flak was coming on me time and time again, as it normally does, what you would expect for your teammate is just to basically say, you know what, you just sit this one out. I'm going to do this one. If you're expecting a bit of flack. Now, that might have been that Neil Lennon was quite happy to do it, Kev. He might have said, I want to face the press. I want to give them our side of the tale. But I just felt that it was a positive. I actually did feel that John Kennedy coming out was a positive, because otherwise you think it's maybe this fractured nature of the coaching staff where it's all on Neil, give him the blame, all the bad signings are his fault, everything that goes wrong is Neil Lennon's fault. Whereas John Lennon came out, and John Lennon, God almighty, I've got John Lennon on the brain. John Kennedy comes out. Stand by me, that's what I was thinking. John Kennedy comes out, and I just felt that it was almost like an effort to say, we are a team. And we're galvanised. There was a lot of positive stuff he came away with as well, in terms of we need to go on a 19-game unbeaten run. We know that. We're going to approach every game as a must-win match, which I think is brilliant. There's a message coming through, just to let everybody know how this works. Anybody that makes a comment on the Bulletin, Kev, they're all filtered into one place. So if you're making it on Facebook, Twitter or YouTube, all I see is all the comments coming in. And it can, on one occasion we had something like 800 comments. And I try to go through them as much as possible, but some people are saying, well, the same guys' names pop up. Generally, the reason for that is they get in early. So if they make a point, and it's one of the first 5 on my screen here, if that point's made a different way another 12 times, the point's been made early doors. So there's no favouritism. And I know that Stephen Forbes does pop up quite a lot, because he's normally right in there early doors. He was saying the Huddle Breakdown, another excellent podcast with a friend of the show, Alan Morrison, recently provided compelling stats on our improved form since playing the Diamond with Sorrow and Turnbull. Is there a belief we could go on a run of max points until the next derby? Well, that question was kind of posed to Kennedy yesterday, Kevin. Can Celtic go 19 games and win 19 games based on, the 6 games before the last Rangers game? What's your thoughts on that? Because I've been asking the pundits all week about the next 4 fixtures in January compared to the league leaders Rangers. Do we believe they're going to drop anything? Do you think Celtic will get maximum points? We'll find out today. Rangers are up at Pittodrie. We'll find out if they're going to drop anything up in Aberdeen.
Well, what really annoyed me about last week, we've only got 3 chances this season where we can affect what happens with Rangers, and we blew one of them last week. With regards to going 19 games unbeaten from now to the end of the season, now to the end of the league season, we've only won 6 games in the last 19. So it's not a normal season for us. It isn't a normal season, so we can't say that we can go on that run, because you just have to have a look at our previous couple of months to say that seems extremely unlikely. For us to win the league, we're going to need to see an absolute collapse of the team across the city, and basically they've got no pressure on them whatsoever. They've got a massive gap, and the only time you can ever see any pressure coming on them is if we get down to single figures games and we're down to single figure points behind them. Say when we played them at Celtic Park, it looks like if we had won every game and beat them at Celtic Park, I think we're 7 behind with 6 games left. That's when pressure comes on. That's when pressure. Up until that point, there's no pressure whatsoever. And for us still having games to catch up, the 3 games to catch up, then it's a very, very big ask. It's an extremely big ask. But it's one that we've got to challenge head on. It's one that the coaching staff have got to challenge head on. And it's no surprise that John Kennedy came out and was extremely positive and upbeat about the challenge ahead of them yesterday, while identifying and giving a nod to how difficult it is going to be. I mean, if you're cynical, and everybody knows that I'm really cynical and I'm really negative, you could say that Kennedy was wheeled out yesterday because Neil Lennon's a lame duck manager, and Kennedy's got to be doing these press conferences between now and the end of the season, now and a change at one point. So you can maybe look at it that way. So
you could. I mean, I was trying to be as positive as possible about that particular situation, Kevin. What I could say is that when things started to unravel at Hibs, one of the first things he'd done is he stopped speaking to the press in the conferences, and they were faced with Gary Parker. So I wasn't going to go down that route, because I actually felt that the press conference went pretty well. I know that there was a bit of criticism about why Celtic put David Turnbull in front of the cameras, but again, it's one of these things. As a top flight player, Kevin, you're going to have to deal with the press.
Aye, that's part and parcel of your job. It's part and parcel of David Turnbull's job, and hopefully David Turnbull will get better as the years go on at dealing with the press. Yeah, I think if you go back and you have a look at the early James Forrest interviews and the early Callum McGregor interviews, these guys didn't really seem to be comfortable with the press until Brendan Rodgers came. And I'm wondering if Brendan Rodgers got them some bland media training if you look at the English Premier League and you look at the young players there, you can tell that they get media training because it's bland, cliched rubbish that they come out with. They can talk for 5 minutes and not say anything.
I know, you're spot on. A couple of things coming to mind. One example of that is the boy Scott Parker, who's obviously carving out a coaching career down south. I actually rated him as a player. I remember him coming through as a kid at Charlton. But can you remember his first kind of media appearance? It was in a McDonald's advert doing Keep Uppies in the back garden. Can you remember that? Next thing you know, he's on the Big Breakfast getting interviewed by Kim Wilde, and now he is the epitome of what you've just described, the most bland interview. Every time you hear him, it's the same stock kind of phrases. And that's why when people come away with, when you get this personality, and I think that it's good to see the likes of love him or loathe him, and I'm pretty sure a lot of Celtic fans loathe him, Jose Mourinho being back on form with that personality, because he lost that for a long time. So it's always good to get different faces. So I'm not looking too much into the fact that Kennedy or indeed Turnbull were at the conference, but there was a lot of interesting stuff coming out of that interview. And I'm going to bring up Kaplan Mark. Kaplan Mark is a regular contributor to Axom, so welcome to the show. You're commenting on YouTube. This is the realism of how far we have regressed, that we even consider Jack Hendry. Worrying that many are forgetting the real issue, our manager and staff. Actually, what I would say, I think a lot of people are, but I'm not. I'm certainly not. What I'm trying to look at the moment, Kevin, is how can we salvage it? Is there a way of salvaging it? Yeah, because it's not mathematically impossible. It's very, very unlikely. There's the head and there's the heart, and when you're giving your opinion, you've got to stick with the head, and that's what I'm trying to do, be a realist. And I think a lot of what you come away with, Kevin, is realistic rather than negative, to be honest. And this word negative keeps getting thrown, and I don't buy that. We're in a situation, as you say, where we are relying on perhaps Aberdeen getting something today at Pittodrie. Do you think they will? Possibly, but I'm not confident that they will. Will Hibs get something from Rangers at Easter Road? They have already this season, so yeah, there is a chance of that. Motherwell and Ross County is the two other games. They've both got the new manager bounce, which is another football cliche that's crept in to the parlance when we're talking about football, Kevin. I think you never know. You just never know. If they drop anything at all, brilliant, but Celtic need to maximise on that, and Kennedy spoke about it yesterday. Now, on the subject of John Kennedy, one person who had a lot of positive things to say about him was Damien Duff. We'll get to Jack Hendry in a minute, Capital Mark, in case you're thinking I'm digressing. But Damien Duff had lots of positive words to say about John Kennedy when he left the club. You'll remember he says that he was a top-class coach. He had a big future in the game. Now, we felt, and we've discussed it, because we've tried to look at every potential reason, Kevin, for the collapse, as well as all the mitigating circumstances surrounding how hard we've been hit with COVID, casualties, injuries. I mean, the reason we're talking about Jack Hendry is because of an incredible run of injuries that we've had with Julian. So yes, let's talk about the Damien Duff situation. Obviously, anyone who's read into that will know that the team were played a motivational video before the game. We've heard these things, haven't we? When Saturday comes, we've heard all this stuff about motivational videos, how you try and get a team up for it. And the Republic Island side were played a motivational video showing you various aspects of Ireland's history, which included the 1916 Easter Uprising. And the FAI were incensed about this, Kevin. Absolutely incensed. And Damien Duff stood up to them and says there's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. And since then, he has wanted to resign from his position. It's happened over the Christmas period. Obviously, Ireland are going through a pretty sticky patch under Stephen Kennedy. Stephen Kennedy? John Lennon? No, Stephen Kenny. Stephen Kenny. I should know his name. He's the next Dunfermline manager. And Damien Duff has basically walked. He's resigned, which has led a lot of Celtic fans to say, get him back in. Now, what I would say, and I know this because it's came directly from source, Celtic were sounding out potential coaches. Now, I'm not saying they were going to sack anybody. They were sounding out potential coaches. A couple of months ago, Kev, I told you that once the information came to us, to come in and assist Neil Lennon. So, there's a situation now. Damien Duff, we know he left for personal reasons. He wanted to move to be closer to his family, Kevin. Is there any way, do you think that would benefit us in any way? We're going to get on to talking about signings in a moment. Would Damien Duff be a big positive, bringing him back into the coaching staff?
This could be a situation where a player leaves, see like how we get a player doesn't play and it all of a sudden becomes a world beater. Mm-hmm. Damien Duff's left and all of a sudden we've turned into months. So they've went, it's Damien Duff, he must have been the brains behind that operation. The reason that Duff left was because of the pandemic and he wanted to go back to his family. And that situation hasn't changed from when he left in the summer, truthfully.
It's got worse.
It's got worse, it really has. So even if you bring him back across, there's a isolation, he wouldn't be able to work with the squad, he would have to get back in the bubble. And what would that say to Gavin Stratton? What would that say to John Kennedy? What would that say to Stephen McManus? What would that say to Darren O'Dea, who have all been promoted at that time, for Duff to come back in as a coach, assistant manager? I don't know what he would come back in as. I think it's a strange one. I didn't actually know the reason why he left his job at the Republic Island, so that was interest. That's an interesting story, and I'm quite glad he's actually stood up to the FIA for that, because what was shown was that there's nothing wrong with a motivational video with a 1916 uprising. It's how the Irish Free State was formed. So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, what did the FIA do when Jack Charlton and Andy Townsend were playing the Wolf Tones on the bus going to World Cup games? It was completely different times, eh? I can't see. I mean, if they were looking to bring in a coach to help out Neil Lennon, who was it? I'm sure it would have been an older coach. I'm sure it would have been a father figure type.
We spoke about O'Neill, didn't we? We spoke about even Gordon Strachan. Yeah.
I can't see Damien Duff coming back in unless it was part of a new coaching setup. Unless he was coming in to assist John Kennedy. There you go. If Neil's not going to be hanging about much longer, I could maybe see Duff coming back in on an interim basis to give Dick Kennedy a dig out.
Interesting. Yeah, but I take on point what you're saying there. A player leaves and all of a sudden, and we're going to get onto that in a moment, Jack Hendry, all of a sudden he becomes Jack and Bauer, as described by the scout who actually watched them for Celtic. So the next point coming up is Jack Hendry. You've made the very accurate point in saying that, if someone's not at the club, all of a sudden they become better. We've seen it so many times down the years, people shouting for Bobo Baldi to get a game, although, Gordon Strachan has been very, for me, he's been very stubborn in that situation, as he was with Derek Riordan, Tommy Gravison, Massimo Donati, and they become better than they actually have been performing. So yeah, I'd absolutely take that on board. Now, Kevin, I told a story last week about how we are highlighting or shining a light on certain aspects of the club that when you're winning, you don't tend to do it. Now, if you did, and we're winning 9 in a row and everything's fine and we're winning trebles, and you were saying, but you know what, I'm not happy about our transfer policy, I'm not happy about the coaching, I'm not happy about the culture, then I think you would be putting yourself up for being branded negative, absolutely. But what then happens is when it's not working as it's not at the moment, and we start trying to find out the reasons why it's not working, then people say, well, if it's a whole recruitment issue, if it's a whole structural issue, why have you not discussed it before? I think you probably have brought it up before, but I used the example, Kevin, when you and I were at the Motherwell game. That was the second treble. And we, due to the fact that it was tough to get tickets, and I think you probably did have a chance of a ticket elsewhere, I didn't. We had to go into one of the lounges for that game, didn't we? Yeah. And there were Celtic players milling about in the lounge, and I remember, I specifically remember Marvin Comper was one of them, because all the guys who had a few beers, and by the way, this is not beer because I've been accused of drinking on the show before, teetotal, I get accused of drinking on the show. So Marvin Comper was there, I remember him, and all the guys that had a few sherbets were up getting the old selfies and all the rest of it. There was 2 or 3, I was going to say Doris de Vries was maybe one of them. Was one of them also Jack Hendry? Can you remember?
Jack Hendry, Comper, Liam, I was going to say Liam Miller, the fullback, the young fullback that recently left.
Calvin Miller.
Miller.
Yeah.
Compare, Jack Hendry was one of them. Doris de Vries. There was another couple of young players that I think that have now left. I think young Henderson was one of them. I think Ewan Henderson was one of them as well. But I wanted to go and get my picture took with Compare. But
you wanted to get your programme signed, Kevin, and I says, behave yourself. Are you 13?
I wanted to go and get my picture took with Compare and send it to the lads on the bus. Say, go, look at this guy. He exists. He is actually here. But I would have done that if I hadn't been 7 years clean and sober. I would have got thrown out in my old days. I'd have got thrown out that lounge.
Kevin, I dread to think. But the reason I bring it up is that Jack Hendry obviously was one of the players, and Caplo Mark says in his previous comments that we even consider Jack Hendry. It shows you how far we've regressed. I think the reason I'm bringing it up is because and I tweeted out tongue-in-cheek earlier on the Axon page that the next target might be a young Scottish player tearing it up in Belgium. He's being chased by Aston Villa. That's our very own Jack Hendry. We're looking at, and this will lead us into the Philip Benkovic question that we asked yesterday as well, or the day before yesterday, Kevin. We've got a player there. We've probably spent £1.5 to £2 million on him. He was at Celtic as a youth. We all know the story. Went down south, got some game time, came up and pressed for Dundee. Didn't work out for him at Celtic. He's went away and he has developed elsewhere, as has Callum McGregor, Ryan Christie, Chris Ayer, and probably to a lesser degree Tommy Rodgick. These are guys who, their loan deals elsewhere were pivotal to their development at Celtic. Tommy Rodgick barely played for Celtic before he went away back to Australia, and I know he went back there to try and get into the World Cup squad at the time. But they can be beneficial, these loan deals. The aforementioned Afolabi, we'll speak about him later on. There's a few other guys out on loan at the moment doing pretty well. Robertson down at Gillingham. So Jack Hendry, yeah, I completely get them. The very mention of Jack Hendry's name will get people saying, are you joking? We brought a guy in Shane Duffy that's cost us, I think it was a £2 million loan fee, Kev, massive wages. And would he have done any worse? Would Jack Hendry have done any worse than Big Duffy? We're then speaking about bringing Philip Benkovic back in. It was something that John Kennedy spoke about in the conference. He says this is a guy that we know very well. You know, so he was on the radar. So happens that it looks as though he's going to join Jack Hendry in Belgium. So Jack Hendry, do you just say no chance, we're not going to bring him back? We continue to look for players either on a loan deal, short-term loan deal. Why not bring back the player that we've developed? I'm just throwing it out there. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree. I completely agree with you. Rather than spend a loan fee on somebody like Benkovic, you've got a centre half there who has went off the radar to try and get his confidence back up. I says was it a week and a bit ago when I done the bulletin with John Paul Mason, that I says at this point next year we'll be talking about Jack Hendry. Because my feeling was he would come back in after his loan move to a new manager without any baggage that he's had with the previous managers, and he'd the chance to impress a previous manager after having a good season somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So that was always there is a player there. There is obviously a player there. But why are we looking to bring in guys who are going to cost us money if we can bring Jack Hendry back? Why? I mean, you have to give guys a chance, and that's something that us as a support of football in general, we never seem to give players second chances or third chances. He's 25. He's doing well. If there's an option to bring him back, we should bring him back, and we shouldn't actually turn our nose up at that.
I know it's kind of scoffed at. You think, well, actually I would need to check this, but I don't think he's played under Neil Lennon at Celtic. But when you look at the first game at Celtic Park against Rangers, Kevin, where obviously we had a big issue, Duffy played even though he probably shouldn't have because he had dental treatment, Julien was out, and we ended up playing young Welsh, who's disappeared from view. Had Hendry been still part of Celtic's first team squad at that point, you would have thought that he would have been ahead of the queue over Welsh because of the experience that Jack Hendry had. You know, so would he, be a first choice under normal circumstances? No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't be able to displace Hire or Julien at centre half. But under the circumstances, and people might say, well, you're throwing the towel in. You've got to go out, you've got to make this last push for, to salvage the 10 in a row dream. And what you've got to kind of take into account, though, is you're looking at the run of games between now and the next Rangers game, Kev, and you think we should win them with the squad we've got. So if you were to bring another defender in for cover, or he's going to play, obviously, for the next 3 or 4 months, we might actually see Shane Duffy coming back into the side. Is that a better or a worse option than bringing back someone who's in form?
For me, bringing back Benkovic was just unimaginative. It was just somebody that we knew that would come in, and he's only played something like half a dozen games since he left us the first time. So what's to say that Benkovic was going to be any better than a player that's already on your books? It just seems to be that the instant need for instant gratification, something new and shiny, bring somebody in rather than looking within. And we're all guilty of that as football fans. We're all guilty of doing that. But I think we've got to the stage now where you look at that Celtic team last week, and if you look at the worst case scenario, next season you're going to have a new management team. Now, I think we are going to have a new management team next season. We could have a new management team before this season has actually ended. But next season, that team that played at Ibrox last week, you could only have Barkas, you could only have Beaton, Sorrow, Turnbull, Callum McGregor and Lee Griffiths. 6 players available. Then who came on as subs? El Hamid came on as a sub. He's not going to be here next season. Scott Brown is going to be here at some capacity next season. But you're looking at a massive rebuild, and you're looking at Jack Hendry could come back in and under a new manager catch fire. He could catch fire, and he could become. And you're talking about a player who's been in and around the club. He needs no time to settle. Mm-hmm. So you could find a lot of these players that are out on loan at the moment come back in and get their opportunity. So we can't write off anybody.
No, I'm going to throw something into the mix as well, Kevin. I think, Jack, there's this transition. There's a transition from other Scottish clubs, and I don't even mean Dundee, but clubs like Hibs, Dundee United, where we've purchased players from fellow Scottish clubs, Kevin, and they've failed to make that leap. That's a big leap, and I've spoken to players who have made that transition from another Scottish club to Celtic. It's a huge transition, right? So a big part of that is obviously when you're playing at Celtic Park in front of 60,000 Celtic fans, we're very unforgiving. We are very unforgiving, and one of the big things that's been said this season, and I can't say because I'm not a player, or I don't know what the effect is on the players individually, is that Celtic have missed their fans more than other clubs. I've heard that, but what can also happen is it can absolutely destroy and demoralise a player. And I remember Jack Hendry coming back. I almost called him Jack Ross. It's all these names flicking about my mind. We're not talking about him today. Jack Hendry actually came out on social media, didn't he? Came out on social media, started falling out with Celtic fans, ended up removing his accounts, I believe, after that. So, would you throw into the mix the fact that if he comes in, yes, you have the huge pressure of playing for Celtic, and I'm not taking that away, but you're playing in front of empty stadiums. So you don't have that added pressure of 60,000 Celtic fans who have probably written him off for the largest part anyway, Kevin, and who probably do want a new shiny defender from some faraway land who sounds good. That again might work in his favour. Do you think it's even something the club are considering at this time?
I'm no bored with Jack Hendry falling out with silly Celtic fans on social media. Some silly Celtic fan on social media posted his wage slip with his national insurance number on it. So I've got no qualms about Jack Hendry actually falling out with guys on social media, faceless guys on social media. Look, whatever we do this window, unless it's a massive, massive change, is just putting a stick and plaster on a cut artery. We're like, what was the name of that chitting? Mike the Miracle Chitting, who survived for 18 months after getting his head cut off. This is a true story. Is
this a Disney movie or something gone wrong?
No. In 1945, a farmer chopped his chitting's head off and didn't kill it, and it survived for 18 months without its head. And it was called Mike the Miracle Chitting. And eventually it died because it choked on a bit of corn. It's a true story, and that's what we're like. We're like, as a club, we're like Mike the Miracle Chitting. We're just waiting on someone to come and kill us. So what doesn't matter.
Did you read that in the Daily Sport?
No, I didn't read that in the Daily Sport when I did buy the Daily Sport. It's true. So whatever we're going to do this window is just putting a stick and plaster over an artery. So bringing back Benkovic for me is not as wild as bringing back Jack Hendry. They're both on the same unimaginative. And I'm not saying Jack Hendry is going to be the vaccine that's going to cure all COVID. Jack Hendry is just like bringing back Benkovic, except we're already paying this guy. He's already on our books and we didn't need to actually pay a fee. And Jack Hendry is probably going to be on less wages than what Benkovic would actually command as well. Absolutely. Danny, 67, thanks for getting involved on YouTube. Glad Djurdjevic has signed with someone else, which then begs a question from Treble on YouTube. Is Benkovic confirmed to be going to Belgium? I think it's more or less a done deal now, isn't it? It's not been confirmed in terms of the club announcing that he's there. But it's Leuven, isn't it? That was one of the clubs that Tony Watt played for when he was on loan over there. So yeah, it looks as though it's a done deal. Celtic obviously know all about the player, but a big part of that is, since we developed these windows, Kevin, we've actually added or tried to, and I think the English League's one of the worst for doing it, they've just added this massive pressure on clubs to splash the cash. I mean, when you look at the last transfer window down south, was it 200 million quid had been spent? It was just incredible during a pandemic, during a time when fans are struggling to pay their bills, never mind for a season ticket. And you see that hundreds of millions of pounds getting thrown about. But football fans and the world of social media demand, announce a player, announce a signing, announce this one, announce that one. If Jack Hendry came back in, people would be
thinking it was a bad move. They would be underwhelmed by it. But in actual fact, if you looked at all the stats, he'd maybe be just as good as bringing back someone like Benkovic. And talking about his injuries, that was the biggest concern for me. He's barely played since he left Celtic. I like him. I thought he was a very, for me, he was one of the guys that you keep referring to. You just need to bring in a big Eastern Bloc defender that does the job, and I think he did that, but he also had a wee bit of finesse also. And I think him and Simunovic, always looked at those two and thought, they two guys would have been a good partnership, and never really seen it. Jim Orr last week spoke about why did we let Simunovic go? He's still not without a club, etc. So all these options we're looking at, and that was one thing he did confirm, John Kennedy, we are looking at centre halves. But
there is a reason that Simunovic hasn't got a club, is because he's not fit. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't pass a medical. That's how Celtic tried to sell him a number of times. His agent actively pushed for the sale to go through when they knew he would pass a medical. So that's the reason that he's sitting there without a club.
We would have sold him for 4.5 to Torino had he passed the medical. If you think back, that was a deal that was going to go through, and it came down to the knees. He's got knees of glass. Going back to what Jim Orr said last week, we had him for another year. I think what we had was an option for another year. Is that right? So obviously it comes to that point. I don't think he gets paid his full wages for a year, but you have the option to release him, and obviously a deal's done at that stage and he can go and find another club. Treble comes on to say Damien Duff should be our number one target this window. Again, Kevin, sometimes
can he play centre half?
He still looks in good shape, to be fair. And obviously this then leads on for people to look at the new managerial team if and when that happens. But I had quite a few comments coming through over the weekend, Kevin, to suggest that, something Lawrence said last week, Neil Lennon's going to be here next season as well. Do you think that's a possibility?
Of course it's a possibility. Say for example, we win the Scottish Cup, retain the Scottish Cup, and lose the league by 5 points. The board will reckon that goodwill factor's still there, so we'll give them another go. And we know that's how this board are going to operate. We know how we know that this is how. We've already been told basically we're not listening to these. We know better. Mm-hmm. So what they'll be sitting there hoping for is we get away with it, and if we do lose the league. And I'm saying do because it's not mathematically impossible. They're hoping that they don't need to get rid of Lennon before the end of the season. They're hoping that we maybe win the Scottish Cup, get to the Scottish Cup final, win the Scottish Cup, and finish, say, 5 points behind Rangers. But give it a right good hammering for now at the end of the season. And they'll be completely justified because they'll think that they're completely justified in keeping Neil Lennon in charge. That's what they're sitting there praying for.
See, the thing, Kevin, I actually do believe that we will close the gap. I mean, a combination of 2 games against Rangers, the 3 games in hand, and here and there Rangers dropping a point or two, and some of them will be unexpected, very much like the unexpected defeat to St Mirren. Unfortunately, it was in the Cup and not in the league. So I do expect that gap to shrink over the coming months. Would that make it all the more frustrating then to look back on January and say we didn't push the boat out, we didn't go for a centre half, we didn't try and add a wee bit more quality to certain areas of that park?
It probably would, but I always go back to the Tony Mowbray window, which we spent a lot of money and it ended up being an utter disaster, even though we got to see Robbie Keane for a number of months in a Celtic jersey. But that was them pushing the boat out for a lamed up manager. And for me, we're still in the same situation. We'd be pushing the boat out for a lamed up manager.
I think one of the biggest frustrations, in fact I know one of the biggest frustrations that Tony Mowbray had in terms of the signing policy at Celtic, Kevin, because these managers know what the signing policy is when they take the job, of course they do, but they become frustrated, I think, when players are identified and the deal's not done, or players are sold from under them. And there were actually 2 players, and one of them was, remember, Danny Fox, and the other one was Massimo Donati, believe it or not, because I think Tony Mowbray started getting a tune out of Donati. I was always a fan of Donati. I just thought he had all the attributes to be a top class player, and then it comes down to can the coach get a tune out of him. I thought he started to. The last thing we've seen Donati doing in a Celtic jersey was scoring against Arsenal, and he was swiftly sold on for $1.5 million or something like that. But that was all done without Tony Mowbray. Tony Mowbray wasn't consulted. The player was sold.
That seems to happen quite often with Celtic, and it's one of these, even when we've been successful, has been one of, I think you can go back to Gary Hooper, Joe Ledley as well. Joe Ledley left the club when he didn't want to leave. Gary Hooper left when he didn't want to leave. It just seems to be the way that we are, and it's terrible. If we're going to have a director of football, appoint a bloody director of football. Make the director of football the most important person in the club, and say this is the structure. You've got the director of football, then you've got the man, then you've got the coach. I've been getting into the NFL recently, not the Neil Francis Lennon, but the NFL, the American NFL, and the number of general managers that are sacked along with their coaches because the owners go, well, you appointed that man, you appointed that coach, he's failed, you're out the door as well. And that doesn't seem to happen at football. The CEOs and the director of football seem to be actually bulletproof because they're in the owner's back pocket. But it's something, how many failed managers has Peter Law actually presided over?
Failed managers, probably when you think about, you go back to 2003, Tony Mowbray. You can't. I wouldn't call Ronnie Dyler a failure.
No.
I wouldn't call any of the others failures.
Well, what really
Tony Mowbray.
Mowbray,
yeah,
probably be the biggest failure. What really annoys me, and maybe failure's the wrong word, but what really annoys me, you mentioned Ronnie Dyler, and I've said this plenty of times. Dyler and Rodgers were a certain type of manager who showed that the club were going in a certain direction. There were coaches and managers who developed players. As the first opportunity they get, they bring back Neil Lennon, who's completely different from the two men who have been the 5 previous years before them. And that says the wrong thing about the direction of the football club. They were blinded by the 10. They were blinkered by the 10 to bring back Neil Lennon. If we weren't on 8 when we appointed Neil, say we were on 6, we would have appointed another development coach rather than Neil Lennon.
The big thing
for me, that's the biggest failure.
I don't disagree with that. The thing going back to Ronnie Dyler is the biggest problem for me with that appointment, Kevin, wasn't bringing Dyler in, because I actually think that when you look at the reasons for it, there's a man who was highly rated by a number of clubs all over Europe, including Manchester City, as we know, who wanted him to go and work in the academy for Man City, and we appoint him as the number one. I think that was the wrong decision. I think at that stage, when he was at that stage of his own development as a manager, the best thing to do would have been to bring him in as a coach, to bring him in as that talent spotter, to bring him in as the guy who could develop youth players, which he did, and he proved time and time again that he could do that. And I'm not saying John Collins was a perfect foil to that, but what you then need is a figurehead. Now, loads of clubs do that, Kevin. The guy that's the manager isn't the one with the tactical nous, and I think that's the situation at Ibrox. I think Steven Gerrard is a figurehead, and it can work. And I think that's where the big issue really was with Ronnie Dyler coming. I think it was good to appoint him, but not as the number one. I think he should have been the coach. And a few people have said to me he would never have taken that job. I think he would have, because when you look at development of managers, that would have been good for his development. It was still a trajectory going up the way. It wasn't a downward trajectory to take a coach's job at Celtic from where he was in Norway. And I think when you're looking at Jack Ross, and we'll get on to the Hibs game at some point, Kevin, but I think the Sunderland move was the wrong way about. That's the kind of move you would expect him to take after Hibs. So when you're looking at a development of a manager, coming to Celtic was right for Ronnie Dyler. It was right for Celtic, but not as a number one.
Definitely. If you have a look at Dyler now, where he's in New York, which is still part of the Man City organisation. So his time at Celtic hasn't diluted his view in that organisation. And New York, the MLS is all about development now, and the New York franchise, I'm going to call it a franchise because that's what it is all about development. They're not going to go down the big name route that they were. So they want Dyler there to develop players. One of the comments actually says there, would you take a Dyler type manager now to for long term. If the club come out and says, look, we are going down this route, we're going to have a few experienced players and we're going to have a whole load of development players, and this is the type of coach that we're going to bring in, and we're going to bring in a director of football to oversee the whole of this, I would fully back that. I would fully get on board with that. I would. As long as the director of football had a bit of clout in the European game. I think, is it Van der Sar's the director of football at Ajax or whatever it is? Your director of football would need to be the one with the clout. I mean, people mention Ralph Raniak. I would bring in Ralph Raniak as a director of football and let him appoint a coach.
Kev, would your view change whether or not we win 10 in a row? And I know it's not mathematically impossible, and whilst it's not impossible, I'm not giving up hope. I think it's highly unlikely. I would like to see something in January to give me a wee bit more faith in terms of Rangers dropping some points. Would your view on that change, though? If we win 10 in a row, would you still say, listen, let's try something a bit different? Let's bring in someone who can develop a side over a period of 5 years rather than this. It's basically just, putting down the train tracks as we go. Another league, just to get to the 10. Would you still be quite happy? Should we do such a thing? Because I think we're less likely to do it if we lose 10. Because the club will be looking at an instant reaction to that. So they'll be wanting instant results rather than something that might take a few seasons to develop.
I think 10 was always the end anyway. It didn't matter if we won it or not. And I think the club had to go into a direction, a longer term direction, and a more European view direction after 10. I think we've been blinkered by the 10. The 10's been a noose round our neck, and it's affected our decision making, especially in the last 18 months. I really think it has. It's almost as if we didn't believe in our own business plan and what's happened in the last 18 months.
Now, Kev, we've spoken about words being important, and I'm just bringing this up before you get it in the neck. It didn't matter if we won it or not. You didn't mean it didn't matter. What you meant is the decision that was made. It didn't matter if we won it or not. The decision that they have in their mind would still stand. Now, Stephen James, welcome back. Stephen, I hope you're doing well. You're commenting on Twitter. He calls him Benkovic. Brilliant. It would be ideal if we could have got the 19 games out of him, but that looks unlikely. And I take Mark's view. Welcome back on YouTube, Mark. Philip Benkovic only played 90 minutes for Cardiff. If he's not match fit, it'll be next December, judging by Griffiths. Listen, that is a concern for me as well. You want to get someone who comes in who can hit the ground running.
Definitely, and Jack Hendry's fit. He's playing games. So there's going to be no fitness problems with Hendry if you're bringing him in. I've seen the guy from Motherwell being mentioned as well. The problem that I've got with the guy from Motherwell is not that we're signing for Motherwell that he's 29. He doesn't fit. He doesn't seem one for the future at 29, and his career just seems to have hit a good trajectory at this precise moment in time, and that's the only reason. It's not because we're signing for Motherwell. And did you see the penalty that he gave away yesterday against St Mirren?
I didn't actually.
Well, if you think Shane Duffy's rash, then this was rash as well. So,
well, the thing is, you're saying they're turning your nose up because he's coming from Motherwell. You're right. I know. We wouldn't do that anyway. Look at one of the star performers this season, David Turnbull, came from Motherwell. So, there is talent out there, Kev. As you and I have discussed throughout this season, we've spoken about Lewis Ferguson at Aberdeen. There's other players. And when you're looking at Declan Gallagher, he doesn't fit the mould, because if we buy a player, rather than bringing in these loan players, if we buy a player, we're always doing it with a view to making a profit on him.
Definitely, and that's why I says Turnbull's 20, 21, 22 fits the profile of the players that we sign. Yep. Declan Gallagher at 29 doesn't fit the profile of the players that we sign. It's like a stopgap. Mm-hmm. And as I say, anything that we do this transfer window is going to be like putting a stick and plaster on a burst artery. It really is. And it's just, hopefully it's going to work until we can get some life-saving operation in the summer.
And, because when you're looking at the state of the defence in terms of, Julian's out again for 3 to 4 months. Duffy, does Neil Lennon trust Duffy? Well, when he's picking Neil, I'm good with the names today. Near Beaton. And I'll get his second name right. If you're picking Near Beaton before saying Duffy, then that says that maybe Neil Lennon doesn't trust Duffy to do the job, Kevin. So we need to buy a centre-half or bring a centre-half in at least. You've mentioned El Hamid. There was a story came through from his agent. I'm pretty sure his agent was in that lounge that day as well. Was he the same agent for Marvin Compere? Someone will correct me. But El Hamid apparently has absolutely no intention of going back to Israel. The agent came out and said that he's willing to fight for his place at Celtic. It's mixed messages there.
Obviously his wife found his Tinder profile in.
On that point, you've made a few other suggestions. The reason I brought up El Hamid is, I mean, we've not really seen. I always look at El Hamid. He's a defender, right? Yeah, right back first and foremost. But he has played centre half. He has played left back at previous clubs and at international level. Would you not rather play a defender at centre half if he can do so? Because we never used to do it enough. Well, Mikael Lustig. Lustig was centre-half most his international career, Kevin. Yeah, you know, when we were struggling, often you would think, well, just move Mikael Lustig in there. And we didn't. And I feel sometimes the same with El Hamid.
The way to look at it, if we are looking for centre-halves and if El Hamid is not going back to Israel, then we've got to say that he should be considered at centre-half. He plays in a free for Israel, so does Near Beaton, right enough. He plays for a free in Israel as well. I just think that it's been a problem area for us since we slag Boyata, and we're missing big Boyata. We're absolutely missing the big fella, and even then on some days he was an utter bomb scare. But that's the type of centre halves that we get. You look at centre halves all over the world, and they all make mistakes, and the ones that you pay big money for are the ones that make the least amount of mistakes. And that's why Virgil van Dijk's £70 million, it was because he makes the least amount of mistakes. You've seen his stat, Kev,
you've seen his stat about, you know, the games that he's played against the games that he's missed for Liverpool. It's frightening how many games if you look at the win percentage, the actual it's completely the arses fell out of it, for want of a better expression, since Van Dijk's been out. So I take that point, but again, Celtic want the defenders to be playing football. They want them to pass out from the back, and I think players like Boyata often were caught napping because they're always looking for it, rather than, you know, the likes of Duffy. We thought you described him as a fridge going up a stairwell. We thought we were getting the guy who would just throw himself, throw his body, win balls, win tackles, win headers, do all the basics. But actually, when you look at the style of play, that's not really what we want at Celtic, because they wouldn't fit in.
Celtic need two centre-halves. Two different types of centre-half. They need one who can play long passes, and we need one who can actually break into the midfield and go forward, because we play against packed defences domestically so often. We also need both defenders to be like a Shane Duffy and chuck their head into things as well. And unfortunately, in the modern game, he didn't seem to get too many centre-halves that tick every single box. You look at Julien, he struggled against physical opponents, but you look at his long range of passing, he ticks that box for us. That's where his massive strength lies. You look at Ayer, struggles against physical centre forwards, but you send him forward with that ball, he ticks that box. It's trying to get a mixture of the two, and Duffy just didn't seem to tick any of the boxes to play in the way, especially the open way that our Neil Lennon Celtic team play.
You made a good point earlier, Kevin. You used the word unimaginative. Mr. Briggs comes in to say Kev is just standard lazy journalism, linking us to guys who've been here before, or Irish players seem to be the protocol. Is Robbie Keane still getting spotted at Glasgow Airport every year? The protocol, like you say, unimaginative. Was Shane Duffy an unimaginative signing in that respect?
It probably is. Probably the Shane Duffy thing came about is because his agent probably offered him to Celtic and says he's interested in coming up here. Can you make it happen? And the Celtic coaching staff and the director of football, well, not the director of football, the head of recruitment, Nicky Hammond, and the director of football, Peter Wall, have probably went, that'll be great, he's Irish, you'll get the guys on side. And we did, we all bought into it. We really did. We all bought into it. We bought it hook, line and sinker. The absolute idiots that we are. We did.
Don't hold back. Eugene Ritchie, you're commenting on YouTube. And for everybody who's tuning in, and thanks everybody for getting involved on a Sunday afternoon, subscribe on YouTube. We're burst through the 7,000 subscribers mark over the last few days, Kevin. Next target's obviously 10,000. We'll keep building it. We'll keep providing more content. There's more AXOM content in the works. Why not with Hendry? As was said, there are others where it worked. Other people going out on loan, Kev. Maybe it's because he played a few more games for Celtic than the others who went on loan. Well, I know, obviously, McGregor, being the famous one, never kicked the ball for Celtic until he went on loan. He comes back. He had never played for Neil Lennon until Lennon comes back as a manager. His loan deal famously went well for him, as did the others that I've mentioned. Ryan Christie, rejuvenated when he went to Aberdeen. Chris Ayer at Kilmarnock. The loan deals can happen, and I take Eugene's point. Maybe it's because Celtic fans maybe hadn't written off Ayer because he was a project, wasn't he, under Ronnie Deila. We'd maybe never written off McGregor because we hadn't seen him. Christie, some people I think had written Christie off, and we've probably written Jack Hendry off. I think that's the difference.
It is, and we do write players off. We don't give players chances, and this is where the club have to be better, I think. Stephen Dock had a comment to say, and he actually says that if we had won 9 in a row and a quadruple treble and we changed it, why you would say, why did we change it? We changed it as soon as we appointed Neil Lennon. We changed our tack as soon as we appointed Neil Lennon. But guys like Jack Hendry didn't get a chance with us though, because they're no sexy. They're no Eastern European. They haven't come for the Man City Academy. They haven't come for Italy, and that's the problem. I think
a lot of the people tuning in probably do find them quite sexy, though, Kev.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when he was running about in circles at Firhill, he looked like Mike the Miracle Chatting. He felt a head running around in circles. That
was a shame, because that just became a meme, didn't it?
I know.
Or a gif. Will McMillan, does it matter who plays at the back if they are coached badly and can't defend a free kick or a corner? Still a big issue. We couldn't defend one at Ibrox, could we?
Great point. I mean, everybody says, how can you blame Neil Lennon for our defeat at Ibrox? Well, we've never actually defended a corner kick or a set play all this season. So he's had 4 months to try and sort that out.
Now, there's a point coming in here in relation to Scott Brown, Kevin. You were talking, and I've seen loads of discussions about using what we've got and adding to it, because we were talking obviously earlier about Damien Duff. If he came in as part of the coaching staff, would that work? I've thought long and hard about Scott Brown as well. What would he bring to the table? What's your thoughts on that? I know that he was doing coaching, he was going through his badges. Do you think that would assist in any way, shape or form at the moment? Because it does look now that Scott Brown's time as a starter at Celtic is gone. He's still the captain. Turnbull and Sorrow have come in. Scott Brown is on the bench for the rest of the season.
I think as long as you've still got that core of players there who have played with Scott Brown, then Scott Brown would be a massive influence in the changing room. He still will be, no matter if he's playing, he would be a massive influence in the changing room, still would be. And I think whoever comes in after Neil Lennon will probably appoint Scott Brown in some form of coaching capacity.
Well, if you look at the coaches that Celtic have at the moment, there's so many of them fit that kind of boot room mould, Kevin, where they've been at the club. They know the club, they know the city. And you've got like guys like Sean Maloney who've been here and moved on as well, former player, Darren O'Day, Steve McManus, John Kennedy. There are a lot of ex-Celts within the realms of the coaching set up at Celtic. So it's maybe something that they are looking towards.
It could well be, and it's something. Look, you have to be there on merit, not because you kicked a ball for a football club. You've got to be there because you've got the talent to be there. You've got modern football is changing, and you've got to be on the ball. You've got it's 5 subs, stuff like that. You've got to be tactically aware now, and you can't just get a job with Celtic just because you played with us. You've actually got to get there on merit. And I'm not bothered if O'Day and McManus have played with Celtic before. I want them to be in that setup because they deserve to be in that setup, and they're bringing something to the cause. I noticed Catwalk Mark. What I was actually saying, Catwalk Mark, is I'm not wanting Jack Hendry in the team. I'm just saying bringing back Jack Hendry is just the same as bringing back Benkovic. There's no difference.
There's no difference other than what you said. Benkovic is a signing, you announce him and all this, and it's it's more of a box office announcement. Would he do any better? Brian McLean, 19, points out he's only played 11 games since he left us, so it's a big no. But you're right, it's all about playing that game very much in the transfer market, Kevin, whereby you're saying we've signed a new player, and then it gives some kind of content, it gives some kind of hope, and it builds some kind of momentum. But often these players that we're bringing in are duds. And we've spoken about that as well, the amount of players we've brought in over the last 10 years, including this season, who haven't worked out for Celtic. It's incredible. It's quite a high ratio.
It is. And can we sit here and truthfully say that any player has improved over the last 18 months? No.
Last 18 months? Well, I'm going to say sorry, but I didn't know what he was like before. Turnbull, yeah, I mean, Motherwell fans will say he's always been that good, but yeah, these are the guys who have come into the team. Element of fortune, perhaps. Am I not giving Neil Lennon enough credit by saying that? When he did come in, Kevin, should they have come in earlier? I would suggest yes. But again, there's a few other things quickly to go through. At Laxalt, there's an option to buy Laxalt at the end of the season. Kevin, have you seen enough to suggest that we should?
For the money that Diego Laxalt would cost, I wouldn't buy him. For the money that it would cost. The bottom line, he's got a goal this season, but he hasn't created an assist this season whatsoever. When you look at the stats, and it's not something that I do that often, Diego Laxalt hasn't created a big chance for Celtic. Frimpong's created 6 big chances, and Frimpong's got 2 assists. Greg Taylor has created 5 big chances and got 4 assists. Greg Taylor suits Neil Lennon's Celtic better than Diego Laxalt. And
the guy who's created the most assists is Colin Watt's favourite player, Ryan Christie. 7.
And also another bizarre start is our third highest player to get shots, to take shots during a game, is Shane Duffy at 2.1 per game. Shane Duffy has a shot at goal 2.1 times a game on average. How bizarre is that? That shows you that stats can be made up to say anything. But for me, I'm pinning my hat on the fullback stats. That Greg Taylor is a better option, Laxalt, at fullback.
There you go, but it goes back to a conversation I had with Jackie McNamara, who's his agent, of course, and we're talking about this whole thing that we've touched on today, Kevin, whereby there's this need for Celtic to continually buy players. There's a big kind of churn rate, if you like, players coming in, going out, and there seems to be a need, but a lot of that is down to the pressures of the fans. The fans want to see new faces, especially when things aren't going well, as they are not just now. However, if we were going for 10 in a row and we're sitting 3 or 4 points ahead, we'd still be saying let's strengthen it to make sure this happens. I wanted, before getting on to the Hibs game, because we were talking about Laxalt, and of course he did score the equaliser in the last game we played, the 2-each game at Easter Road. How do you see that game going tomorrow night, Kev? You're going to be joining me for all the action, I hope.
Look, we've had a week in Dubai, and if we drop points tomorrow night, then it's going to be like that moment that Harrison Ford climbs into a fridge in Indiana Jones 5 and the nuclear bomb goes off. If you think you've seen a implosion after the Ross County game, wait till you see it if we drop points tomorrow night after a week in Dubai. My God, it's going to be the Celtic board are going to need to find that fridge and sit themselves in it.
Kev, I didn't even know there was an Indiana Jones 5.
It's not worth watching.
Is Sean Connery in it?
No, he isn't. No, it's not worth watching. Obviously, Harrison Ford climbs in a fridge and survives a nuclear explosion. How bizarre is that? It's like the Fonz when he jumps the shark in that episode of Happy Days.
Was it a smeg? Good fridges.
Probably was. Look, we need to see. We need to actually see an improvement everywhere. Starting tomorrow night, we've got to see our strikers scoring goals. I mean, Edouard's only scored 4 goals for open play this season.
I know.
He scored 7 and 4 full open play. We've got to see Edouard and Griffiths scoring goals. We've got to see our fullbacks creating chances. Frimpong has to start. He creates big chances, but our strikers have got to start taking them. Eddie's sitting on 7 goals. For the end of this, for us to have given a decent go from now to the end of the season, Eddie's got to be sitting by at least 20 goals by the end of the season.
I agree with that.
Griffiths is sitting on 4 goals, the same as David Turnbull. Griffiths has got to be sitting on at least 15, 16 goals by the end of the season. One of our midfielders has got to get into double figures as well. McGregor's on 3 goals, Turnbull's on 4. One of them's got to get into double figures. Christie as well. One of our midfielders has got to get into double figures as well. We've got to start converting the big chances. Instead, I think Eddie's missed 7. As you can see, I've read a stat up in the last hour or so. Eddie's missed 7 big chances this season. He's got to score at least 20 goals by the end of the season. Aiete's on 5 goals. He's got to at least get to double figures as well, coming off the bench, for us to actually give this a goal. And we've got to have clean sheets. We've got to keep on getting clean sheets. Everything's got to improve. The whole of this season we've been like a drunk trying to get his keys in the front door. He needs to get the keys in the front door for now going forward.
First time, every time. From Facebook, Ryan Christie was a fluke getting into the team, was on his way out, and only because of injury was he used. Correct. Same situation with Kieran Tierney, who is ripping it up down south. We all knew he had it in him, Kev. So anyway, you never gave me a prediction tomorrow night. Give me a prediction. You want to leave that till tomorrow night when you join me?
I'll leave that to tomorrow. I'll leave that to tomorrow.
Keep us all hanging. We mentioned Jonathan Afolabi. He has spent some time at Dunfermline previously. He's now on loan at Dundee. I tuned into the game because, we were watching the progress of the likes of Haddington, Kevin, Haddington Athletic, because we're involved with that club, but also Bonnyrigg Rose, because Amy Canavan is one of Axom's pundits and she works in the media side of things for Bonnyrigg. Unbelievable effort from the club. They went out in extra time and obviously Afolabi scored the goal that took it to extra time itself. So brilliant. It's good to see young Celtic players out there doing well on loan, but after the game completely ruined by racists on his Instagram page, getting stuck in all about Afolabi for his race. Absolutely disgraceful. He's Irish, is Afolabi.
He is, aye.
And he's been racially abused. I think that he stood up to that by screenshotting the messages and putting them out there. It's something, something that doesn't seem to be going away, Kevin. I mean, the awareness is constantly strengthened and heightened, but it's still there day to day.
It's in this day and age, it's absolutely terrible. I mean, you look at the scenes for the White House over the last week as well, and that's stoked up by a man who has the codes to the nuclear weapons, and it's like,
aye, yeah.
But you look, we done Colin Watt done a Football Insomniac on race as well, and some of the comments that we got were unbelievable. From so-called Celtic supporters, and you're going, it's a faceless world. Social media is a faceless world. These guys think they can get away with saying things, and it becomes an echo chamber, and they think that hundreds of thousands of people agree with them, and they just think they can get away with it. Social media's got to do something. The platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter and stuff like that, they've got to do something about that. There's got to be some fully registration program. I mean, even some of the abuse me and you get, Paul, is, I mean, a lot of people don't see it, but a lot of the abuse that me and you get as well is quite... I mean, my daughter's 12, and I've been showing her some of the abuse that me and you and the other contributors get as well, to say this is the power of social media. This is what people will try to do.
Yeah.
And I'll show the Afolabi stuff as well, because she's got to learn about that as well, because it's a massive part of their lives. It's something that we never grew up with, and it's something that we're learning about all the time.
No, you're right, because when we were younger, all those years ago, there was no, I mean, yeah, studied media, etc., but there was no kind of view that you could get into this world of social media and the platforms like YouTube, and there are monetisation opportunities for that where people make a good living out of it. It was never considered. So it's good to educate, Kev, like you're saying there, some of the pitfalls of it, because yes, the scariest thing for me, or the worst, most disappointing thing for me, the most sinister part of an element of the criticism, because, you know, I do get concerned about other people and how it affects them, Kevin, because some of the stuff, as you say, that's kind of levied out at you and I think, you know, you can deal with it, but it's when it becomes real. Now that is a bit of a contradiction, because it's real by doing it on social media, but when it comes into real life, when the people approach you in real life rather than digitally, and that's when it gets really concerning, because what a lot of people try and do is then bring that into your day-to-day life, your personal life, and that's where it really becomes quite disturbing. So it's just, for me, the best thing to do is continue to call it out. You've just got to continue to call it out, not just racism, but online bullying, harassment. We introduced some fantastic pundits onto the AXOM team 3-4 weeks ago. They've really added loads onto the platform, Kevin, and some of the stick that they get simply for being female is ridiculous.
I know, I'm now with quite some distance the worst pundit on this place, so I'm only here because I've worked with you before. I'm like the old bootroom carry on, But sometimes people think it's banter, and they make a comment, and I think it's an age thing. I think sometimes a lot of this is an age thing. But you look at our Prime Minister, and some of the comments that he's came out with that have been highly racist, people just think it's okay. Mm-hmm. Let's go and defend a statue. Let's go and stand there and defend a statue, defend our rights, defend slave traders. It's all about education. It is really about education. And as you say, as you call it out, and you don't be scared to talk about it. I noticed Philip DeMarco mentioned the Mark Walters incident at Celtic Park. Truly horrific. A sad day for Celtic Football Club was that. But not the View tackled that head on.
They did.
Not the View fans, you tackled that head on. The Celtic support tackled that head on. And if you've got 60,000 fans at a stadium, you are going to have some racists amongst you. Yeah. That's just a fact of life. But you need to challenge this. I've challenged guys singing the Ibrox Disaster song at Celtic Park. I've challenged guys. I went, why are you singing that? And as soon as one person speaks out, other people round about you start shouting as well. All it does is take that one. I've heard some really quite poor abuse at Celtic games, and it's horrific. But you need to call it out. We need to keep on calling it out, and we'll
Definitely.
call it out. We'll call it out on this platform all we want.
No, absolutely. And in the meantime, I don't care what anybody thinks about my hair or my clothes or any of this kind of stuff, or the fact that I look like KD Lang, because I can't actually deny that, or Gash Nesbitt. I can't deny these things, because when I look at pictures, I think they've got a point, and that's fine, that's banter. But when it gets a wee bit more sinister, that's where it becomes a concern, Kev. And we'll keep calling it out, certainly on this platform. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to Kevin Graham. 3.5 years after we've done the first show, we've done over 400 now all in, Kev. The comments have been tremendous on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Join us again tomorrow. We'll be on for the Bulletin at 12:30, and then we'll cover the game at night. I'm looking forward to it, looking forward to getting 3 points tomorrow night, and hopefully Aberdeen will get something at Pittodrie. So all that's left for me to say is, Kevin Graham, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
See you later, lads.